The bartender only realized something was wrong when the human smiled after drinking liquid fire. It wasn't the drink that terrified Varco. It was the way the man calmly pushed the empty glass forward, stared him dead in the eyes, and said, "That tasted like water. Got anything stronger?" That was when Varco tapped the emergency signal under the counter, quietly summoning backup before the man noticed. But it was already too late. It had been a slow cycle in the Glixer Drift, a junk belt station orbiting a half-dead gas planet where the only thing more unstable than the gravity regulators were the drinks. The patrons were the usual mix of bounty runners, illegal traders, down-on-their-luck mercs, and a few shady diplomats who preferred no names, no questions, and no paper trail. Varco, a four-armed Glixerite bartender with scars across his eye ridges and a jaw like broken steel, had seen plenty over the years. He'd served poison to assassins, brewed antidotes for kings, and once poured acid for a guy who called it therapy. Nothing surprised him anymore. Until the door opened and a Terran walked in. The guy wasn't even impressive at first glance. Average height. Dusty clothes. Plain black boots, dark coat, faint scratches on his cheek. Not military. Not corporate. Not dressed like one of the bragging mercenaries with glowing chest plates and overcompensating blasters. He didn't strut or stare people down. He just walked in like he owned the place, sat down at the bar, and gestured for a drink with 2 fingers. Varco didn't like humans. Too much ego packed into fragile little meat shells. But he was a professional, and credits didn't discriminate. So he poured a local brew and set it down. The man didn't touch it. He leaned forward and asked, "You got magma brew?" The whole bar got quiet. Magma brew wasn't just a drink. It was a dare in liquid form. Synthesized from volcanic gas worms on Sector 8 lava, it was technically a toxin. Melted taste buds, ruptured intestines, temporary blindness in 3 species. Banned in 6 systems. Glixerites drank it to impress mates or threaten enemies. Varco gave a little scoff. "You know what that is, human?" The man just smiled. "You pouring or not?" Varco was no fool. Maybe this was some kind of trick. Maybe the guy had cybernetics in his throat. He reached under the bar, unlocked the storage case, and pulled out the sealed flask. It glowed orange like bottled lightning and pulsed with faint internal movement. He poured exactly 1 shot. That alone cost more than what most patrons made in a month. The man picked it up, smelled it like it was wine, and downed it. He didn't flinch. Didn't cough. Didn't blink. Just placed the glass back on the bar. And smiled. Varco blinked, surprised. "You okay?" The man tilted his head. "Got anything stronger?" That was when Varco's instincts kicked in. He slowly tapped the silent alarm under the bar, code black. It would ping any local enforcer within the sector. The code meant possible operative. Unknown threat level. Request immediate eyes. The man noticed. Of course he did. Varco saw the faint twitch of his smile as his eyes drifted toward the security cam in the corner. But the human didn't move. He simply leaned back and scanned the room. By now, everyone was pretending not to stare. A 2-headed broker slid his drink away. A Lorgian bounty hunter muttered something and stood to leave. The only one who didn't move was a drunken Zarnathi merchant, face tentacled and wobbling with false bravado. "Hey, Terran," he slurred, raising his mug. "What's it like drinking fire and still being weak?" The man looked at him, then looked at his drink. "I don't drink to feel strong," he said calmly. "I drink because it's the only thing left that doesn't try to kill me." The merchant blinked, confused. The rest of the room stared. Someone chuckled nervously. Varco tried to keep it together, but this was spiraling fast. He reached for a second glass, hesitated, then set it down again. "So," he asked slowly, "you come to Glixer Drift for business, or just to show off your liver?" The man looked at him. And for just a moment, Varco saw something behind those eyes. Not rage. Not arrogance. Something colder. Focused. Surgical. "Used to be business," the man said. "Now it's mostly nostalgia." The door hissed open. Two enforcers stepped in. Towering in silver and black armor, visors glowing red, weapons holstered but ready. The lead one scanned the room, zeroed in on the human, and approached. "You," the enforcer said. "Identification. Now." The man didn't move. He didn't even reach for a badge. Instead, he pulled a coin from his pocket. A dark silver disc with a rusted edge and 3 notches. He flicked it across the bar. It clinked once, spun, and landed face up. Varco's breath itched. It wasn't a coin. It was a Union veteran token. Type null. That meant one thing: this man had fought in the Border Null Wars. Survivors from that campaign were usually retired, buried with honors, or completely insane. The enforcer narrowed his eyes. "This supposed to scare me?" "No," said the man. "But it scared them." He gestured with his head, toward the rear booth. Varco turned just in time to see 3 bounty hunters hurriedly standing, shoving their chairs aside. They'd been sitting close. Listening too long. Watching too carefully. Now they wanted out. "Sit," the enforcer barked. They didn't. The human calmly reached into his coat. Everyone froze. Even Varco stiffened. But the man only pulled out a second glass and set it beside the first. "Might as well make this interesting," the enforcer growled. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he looked straight at Varco. And smiled again. "I'm just someone who came for a drink," he said. "But you really shouldn't have asked for backup." At that exact moment, the lights flickered. The bar's ceiling speakers gave a soft chirp. "Warning," said the automated voice. "Unidentified encryption signal detected. Security protocols compromised. External override initiated." Varco's jaw dropped. His alarm signal had been hijacked. The man raised his glass. "To Glixer hospitality," he said, then drank. As he swallowed, the lights cut entirely. Just darkness. Then the screams started. The lights flickered once more before stabilizing, casting a dim amber hue across the bar as emergency backups hummed to life. The sound of a dropped mug echoed like a gunshot. Varco stood frozen, his upper left hand gripping the counter while the lower right instinctively reached for the scattergun stashed beneath. But he didn't draw it. Not yet. He watched the human. Always the human. Still seated, still calm, still sipping his second glass like none of the chaos around him meant anything at all. The enforcers weren't so composed. The lead officer barked into his communicator, but only static came through. The second drew a sidearm and scanned the crowd, eyes darting toward the doors, the windows, the ducts. The sudden override of Varco's security signal meant someone else was listening. Someone higher, or someone buried deep enough in the grid to fake being higher. Either way, it wasn't a local trick. This was deep network territory, Black Ops level intrusion, and the only new variable in the room was sitting 3 feet away with a half-empty drink. "I want his hands on the counter," the officer snapped, stepping forward. "Now." The human looked up, his expression unchanged. Then, with deliberate slowness, he set his glass down and raised both hands, palms open, resting them on the polished bar surface. But there was something unsettling in his compliance, something practiced. He wasn't afraid. He was controlling the pace. Like this was familiar. "You want cuffs too?" the man asked lightly, voice devoid of any real concern. "Don't push me," the enforcer growled. The bartender cleared his throat, unsure whether to interrupt but needing to say something. "Sir, I tapped a standard code black. That override wasn't mine. I don't know how he did that." "I didn't," said the human, tilting his head slightly. "Someone else did. I just left the door open. That did it." The second enforcer stepped in, trying to restrain him. But the moment his hand reached for the human's shoulder, he froze mid-motion. Literally froze. His body went stiff like a statue, hands still extended. Eyes wide, unmoving. Varco gasped. The lead enforcer shouted and raised his blaster. "Move and he dies!" the human said softly. Don't move, and you get to ask a few more questions. The lead enforcer hesitated. The patrons certainly didn't. Half of them were already gone. Chairs overturned. Empty mugs rattling. The two-headed broker from earlier was crawling toward the door like it was a religious pilgrimage. The few who remained either couldn't move or wouldn't. A couple of bounty types were weighing odds in their heads and not liking what they calculated. You're interfering with planetary enforcement, the officer said through clenched teeth. I will shoot. You'll try, said the human. But before you do, maybe ask why the override code that silences your comms uses an Enmaro-class encryption layer. The blaster lowered a fraction. That's classified, the officer replied, suspicious. Exactly, the man said. Now ask yourself, if someone classified enough to use it left me here alone for years, why would you think you're the one meant to bring me in? Varco had heard a lot of posturing in his time. Bluffing was a second language in this bar. But this wasn't that. This was someone who knew the rules so well, he could break them with casual efficiency. The way he spoke, the words he used, the details he didn't bother to explain, all of it told Varco one thing. This man had been off the map for a long time, and the only reason he was back was because he chose to be. The frozen enforcer started moving again, suddenly gasping and backing away in shock. He looked at his arm like it had betrayed him, then at the human. What the hell did you do? Just press pause, the man said, sipping the last of his drink. You're fine now. Unless you keep trying to touch me. The lead officer wasn't ready to drop it yet. He stepped forward, weapon still drawn but pointed low. You're ex-military. Possibly no wars. Why come here? Why now? I didn't come here, the man replied. I was already here. You just didn't notice until I wanted you to. You're making threats. No. I'm stating facts. At that moment, the door opened again. But this time, it wasn't enforcers. 3 figures entered. Heavily armored. Visors down. Not lawmen. Not soldiers. These were corporate. Private. Their armor was painted black with red streaks across the arms. Dravex Security, the private militia of a weapons syndicate Varco didn't like naming aloud. They looked around briefly, then spotted the man at the bar and began walking over. One of them raised a hand. Dustwalker. You've got an appointment. The bar fell into a deathly quiet. Varco swallowed hard. The human said nothing, but his expression shifted, just a hint of disappointment. I'm off duty, the man said. Not anymore, the lead merc replied. The enforcer looked between them. What is this? This, said the human, standing slowly, is what happens when you send children to clean up after monsters. He stepped away from the bar. The mercs flanked him. Varco reached down with one of his lower arms and pressed the glass coin the man had left earlier. It was still warm. He turned it over. The coin changed again. Not a union mark. Not a mercenary tag. A field authorization chip. Live. Whoever this man was, he had full rogue operative access, likely on permanent release. That was the kind of thing issued during high-threat operations, where agents couldn't be tracked for safety of planetary stability. Varco whispered to himself. He was never here for the drink. Outside, the sound of engines flared. Dropships. 3 of them. No markings. No broadcasts. The bartender's gut twisted. He'd seen that type before. Extraction units. Not local. As the mercs walked the human toward the door, Varco couldn't help himself. What's your real name? He asked. The man stopped, turned slightly. I don't use it anymore, he said. And then he was gone. As the doors closed behind him, the lights returned to normal. Communications pinged back online. The static faded. The bar returned to silence, save for the soft mechanical hum of the drink chillers. Varco looked around. No one moved. No one spoke. He reached under the counter, retrieved a rag, and started wiping the counter. One of the regulars, a scaled merchant who'd been hiding under a table, peeked over. You gonna pretend that didn't happen? Varco glanced at the door, then back to the glass the human left behind. It was still glowing faintly. No, he said. But I'm going to pretend I didn't serve him. Then he turned off the house lights and closed the bar 3 hours early. The next day began with a silence far heavier than the previous night's chaos. Varco opened the bar later than usual, his hands slow, distracted, repeating movements on autopilot. He polished the same spot on the counter at least 3 times before he realized no one had come in yet. Not even the usual early drinkers. Not even the 2-headed tax cheat who showed up every morning pretending not to owe half the galaxy. The drift was quiet. Too quiet. He stepped out front for a moment, glancing up and down the steel pathways. Shops were closed. Markets thin. Patrols absent. And every face he saw looked away the moment his gaze found them. Back inside, he poured himself a cup of root extract and sank into the stool at the end of the bar. His eyes kept drifting toward the shelf. That particular spot. The one where he had stored the last magma brew bottle the human had touched. It hadn't stopped glowing. It pulsed now dimly. Almost like a heartbeat. Varco wasn't one to believe in superstition, but something in his gut told him not to touch it again. Not yet. He keyed into the terminal hidden under the counter. The security feed from last night was supposed to be archived by now. Except it wasn't. Every file from the moment the human walked in to the moment he left was gone. Not corrupted. Not deleted. Gone as if that chunk of time never existed. Varco frowned and tried to access backup copies from the external terminal. Denied. Not an error. An override. Same encryption layer. Admiral-level clearance. Again. Frustrated, he did something he hadn't done in years. He sent a private comm to a contact from the old days, someone who owed him a favor and still had access to off-grid military data servers. A retired slicer who had disappeared after the Tarsus collapse. When the message sent, Varco sat in silence, staring at the bottle. He didn't expect a reply quickly. Or at all. By midday, a few brave regulars trickled in. None asked about the incident. None mentioned the name. But the air hung thick with unspoken tension. Conversations were quiet. Drinks were short. Even the loudmouthed smugglers from B sector sat like monks. One patron finally dared to ask a question. What did he say before he left? Varco didn't answer. He didn't even blink. He simply poured the drink, slid it across the counter, and turned away. He had no interest in repeating the last words of someone who might have just turned the entire drift into a ghost zone. Evening came, and the bar was emptier than usual. Outside, the light from the gas giant filtered through the drift's filtration dome in a dull orange haze. Varco was just about to lock the doors early again when the terminal behind him chirped once. A response. The slicer had replied. Varco opened the message, expecting a code dump or a vague warning. Instead, there was a single file. A security reel. Fuzzy and degraded. Clearly taken through layers of filters and non-authorized recording. He hit play. The image shook for a moment before resolving. It was a war zone. Dust and ash filled the sky. Explosions rocked the background. A Terran soldier, unmarked, moved through the chaos like a shadow. Silent. Fast. Too fast. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't even supposed to be there. But every movement was surgical. A knife through enemies who didn't know he was already behind them. The soldier didn't bark orders or rally troops. He just kept moving forward, never pausing, never hesitating. The video feed caught a brief close-up. Just enough to freeze the image. Varco leaned closer, eyes widening. It was him. The man from the bar. Younger maybe, but unmistakable. Same eyes. Same calm. Same precision. Under the image, a single line of data crawled by. Codename, Dustwalker. Status, classified. Kia, presumed. Clearance, null prime override. Null prime. Varco had heard that term once years ago. It referred to a tier of operatives so far buried in the Union's black files that even their existence was denied. Not special forces. Not even assassins. Ghost units. Deployed only when entire planets needed to forget something ever happened. And apparently, one of them had walked into his bar, drank a forbidden brew, smiled, and walked out like it was just another Tuesday. He leaned back, heart thudding. He hadn't just served a ghost. He'd served a legend. The feed ended, and another message popped up. Short. From the slicer. Don't ask questions. If he left you breathing, consider yourself lucky. Keep your mouth shut. Varco closed the file and erased every trace of it from his system. He shut the terminal, locked it, and went to the shelf again. The bottle was still pulsing. Slower now. Duller. Maybe it was reacting to proximity. Maybe it was reacting to the man himself. He grabbed it carefully and placed it under the counter in a sealed vault box, surrounded by 5 inches of tungsten alloy and magnetic shielding. Whatever had happened in that drink wasn't normal. And he didn't want to find out what it did if left unattended. The rest of the night passed without event. A few more regulars came by. A few faces Varco didn't know watched from across the alley but never came in. The bar stayed open until midnight, then closed in silence. As he cleaned up, Varco noticed something new. A small scratch in the wood of the bar where the man had placed his coin. Not a mark from the coin itself. It was deliberate. A carving. 3 numbers. 1 digit from each hand. It took him a moment to recognize the sequence. It was a code. An old one. From the Union days. A field signal that meant safe house cleared. No intel breach. 0 threat retained. The Dustwalker had cleared the bar. Not just spared it. Protected it. Which meant, somehow, it was valuable to him. Varco stared at the mark long after closing time, thinking about how fragile peace was, how easily the past crept back through forgotten doors. Somewhere out there, the ghost had moved on. But the drift wasn't going to be the same. He poured himself one last glass and stood there, watching the reflection of the scratched code in the bottle. Then he drank, not for courage, not for memory, but for the simple understanding that something had shifted. Galactic storms didn't always come with thunder. Sometimes they walked in, drank quietly, and vanished before the lightning struck. And sometimes, if you were lucky, they smiled. The next morning arrived with an eerie stillness, as though the drift itself was holding its breath. Varco unlocked the bar out of habit rather than choice, his movements slow, his thoughts tangled. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. The chairs were where they had always been, the bottles on the shelves were untouched, the same synthetic jazz played faintly from the overhead speaker. But something had shifted in the air. It was heavier now, like the room remembered too much. Like the walls had soaked in the presence of something unnatural and weren't sure how to let it go. He was halfway through prepping the mixers when the outer door slid open without warning. A single figure entered. Not a customer. A woman. Tall, wearing a long black coat with no insignia, no weapon in sight, but with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need one. Her eyes scanned the bar, absorbed every detail, and landed on Varco with pinpoint precision. He didn't speak, just waited. She walked straight to the bar and sat exactly where the human had the night before. "You're late," Varco said after a pause, pouring himself a drink he didn't plan to touch. "I'm right on time," she replied calmly. "He left the signal." Varco stared at her. "You know what that means?" She looked at him for a moment, then tapped the bar twice. The same rhythm as the code the Dustwalker had carved. Her expression didn't change, but something in the atmosphere settled. She wasn't here to interrogate. She was here to verify. And Varco had just confirmed the signal was real. He nodded slowly. "You're part of whatever buried him, aren't you?" "I was," she said. "Now I'm what's left to make sure he stays buried. Or that the galaxy doesn't dig too close." Varco poured her a drink. She didn't touch it. Her eyes lingered on the surface of the counter, right where the coin had sat. "Did he say anything?" she asked. "Not much," Varco replied. He drank. He waited. He left a mess without touching a single soul. Except one enforcer, but he walked away intact. He's changed, she murmured, more to herself than to Varco. Back then, he wouldn't have walked away from a threat. Varco leaned forward. What happened to him? She looked at him, quiet for a moment, then gave the kind of answer that offered nothing and everything at once. He saw something no one should have seen. He did what no one else could. Then he disappeared so the rest of us didn't have to. And now? Varco asked. Now he's drinking in bars. She stood. No explanation, no goodbye. But just before she turned to leave, she said one last thing. He chose your place. That matters. You were neutral before. Now you're protected. Don't forget that. The door slid shut behind her. Later that day, word came in from one of the local haulers. 3 ships had gone missing overnight in the drift's outer orbit. No distress signals. No debris. Just vanished. No signs of piracy. No ransom demands. The security channels tried to blame ion storms, but the locals knew better. The disappearance started a wave of paranoia. Stations powered down their external comms. Checkpoints doubled their scans. The drift's underworld, once loud and bold, went quiet like prey sensing a predator nearby. Back at the bar, Varco spent hours wiping down surfaces that didn't need cleaning. He thought about the coin, the override, the carving. He thought about the way the man had paused time with a glance, the way he had controlled the chaos without ever raising his voice. And more than that, he thought about why someone like that would walk into a bar like his, drink something as reckless as magma brew, and leave without a trace. It wasn't for the drink. It wasn't nostalgia. It was intentional. The question was, intentional for what? As the night dragged on, the patrons who came in did so cautiously. Conversations never rose above whispers. Eyes darted to the door whenever it hissed open. Even the usual troublemakers kept to themselves. They all felt it now, that change in gravity, that unspoken warning that something had passed through and left a shadow behind. Near closing time, a hooded figure slipped into the bar. He wore a travel cloak stained with stardust, boots worn down by real walking, not cosmetic scuffs. He didn't speak. Just walked up to the bar, nodded once, and placed a coin down. Not the same as Dustwalker's, but close. Different shape. Different edges. But the same impossible weight. Varco looked at it, then at the man. You here for him? The figure shook his head slowly. I'm here because he walked out alive. That stopped Varco cold. He was presumed dead, he said. File says Kia. The man tilted his head slightly. He wanted it that way. Being dead made him useful. Varco poured a drink but didn't slide it over. And now? Now people know he's not. That changes things. What kind of things? The man didn't answer directly. He picked up the drink, swirled it, and looked into the amber liquid like it held memories. Once a ghost steps into the light, you can't pretend shadows aren't real. He finished the drink and left the coin. No further explanation. No threat. Just a silent message that someone else knew, someone else was watching, and the ripples from Dustwalker's return had already begun spreading outward. When Varco closed up for the night, he turned off the lights and stood behind the counter in the dark. He didn't pour himself a drink. He didn't clean. He just stood there, listening to the silence. The drift had always been a place between places. A waiting room for the lost, the hunted, the forgotten. Now it was something more. A point of contact. A drop of ink in clean water, slowly staining everything around it. Somewhere out there, Dustwalker was walking again. Not running. Not hiding. Just moving with purpose. And wherever he went next, whoever stood in his path would have no idea what was coming until it was far too late. Varco didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. The ghost had returned. And this time, he wasn't here to disappear. The broadcast came in at dawn, hijacking every comm channel on the drift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't even long. A quiet pulse through the calm lines, then a static-filled message that repeated only once. A voice, calm and steady, one that hadn't been heard publicly in over a decade. It simply said, "This is Dustwalker. Drift is secure. You have 3 days. After that, anyone not meant to be here will be removed." The message ended, but the silence that followed dragged like a vacuum swallowing sound. Every screen, every feed, every encrypted line had picked it up. It bypassed layers of security no one thought still existed. And it left no trace. Varco heard it while restocking the counter. The moment the voice echoed through the room, the glass in his hand slipped and shattered on the floor. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared at the empty space where the bottle had been stored, the one still pulsing faintly in the sealed vault below. The pulse had synced with the voice. The moment Dustwalker spoke, the bottle reacted. As if it was listening too. Within hours, the drift began to shift. Doors shut. Rooms locked. Certain ships powered down and quietly disconnected from all broadcast frequencies. The ones who didn't belong, the ones who came here to pray and disappear, began vanishing. Not violently. Not publicly. But suddenly and completely. Bunkers went dark. Safehouses collapsed their networks. Hidden caches were emptied and their contents vaporized in airlocks. No screams. No alarms. Just quiet evacuations, silent dread, and an understanding no one dared to voice aloud. Dustwalker wasn't bluffing. And they didn't want to find out what counted as removal. By midday, the law enforcement division of the Drift was down to a skeleton crew. Half had resigned. The other half claimed vacation or emergency leave. Those who remained had their names stripped from public records. Enforcers started working without insignias. Patrols vanished from the alleys. The station's automated systems handled everything now, as if the human element was suddenly too fragile to be trusted. Varco reopened the bar but didn't expect much business. Still, a few came in. Not the usual crowd. These were quiet types. They kept their hoods on, their weapons holstered, and never turned their backs to the door. One of them slid a paper note across the bar. It simply read, "He walked through a black zone unarmed. No backup. No armor. Came back with 3 prisoners and 0 injuries. That's not a man. That's a warning." The note had no signature. By evening, the Drift's internal traffic slowed to a crawl. Normally a buzzing port for smugglers, couriers, and traders, the logs showed nearly 40% of outbound travel listed no destination. Just disappeared from the network. Varco knew what that meant. People were turning off transponders, changing ship IDs, ditching their records. Ghosting themselves before the real ghost got to them. That night, something strange happened. A child entered the bar. Small, dirty, face covered in soot, no older than 10 by human standards. Alone. No parents. No guardian. She walked in with bare feet and wide eyes, climbed into a stool, and asked if she could have a glass of water. Varco didn't question it. He poured the water and placed it gently in front of her. She drank slowly, then looked up at him. "You're the one who served him," she said softly. Varco paused. "You know him?" She nodded. "He saved me. On the Broken Moon. I was with a group. The others, they didn't make it. He carried me out. I was so small he put me in his coat pocket." Varco blinked. "That was years ago. I didn't forget," she said. "No one who met him ever forgets." She finished the water, hopped down, and left without another word. Not long after she disappeared into the street, a figure appeared in the doorway. Tall, cloaked, familiar. It was him. No disguise. No illusion. He stepped in like he was returning to his own home. The bar froze. Every patron went silent. Varco felt his heartbeat slow as Dustwalker walked to the bar and sat in the exact same stool he had on the first night. "Water," he said. Varco poured it and slid it across. No questions. No commentary. Dustwalker drank half, then set the glass down. "This place is yours now," he said quietly. I thought it already was, Varco replied. Not officially. But now it is. Varco didn't understand. What do you mean? I've shut down the back doors. Disconnected this station from the black routes. It's clean. You're clean. Why? Dustwalker looked at him, eyes tired but clear. Because you served me without asking questions. Because you didn't try to sell my name. Because the last time I drank anything that didn't try to kill me, it was here. Silence filled the space between them. Dustwalker stood, reached into his coat, and placed something on the bar. A chip. Matte black. No label. No ID. Just smooth, cold metal. Varco didn't touch it. What is it? Drift command override, Dustwalker said. One-time use. If you ever need to make this place disappear, use it. You trust me with that? I don't trust anyone, he said. But I respect you. He turned to go. Varco called after him, voice low but certain. Where are you going? Dustwalker didn't stop walking. Somewhere the drinks are worse. He left without a sound. Just like before. When the doors closed behind him, the air felt lighter, not because the danger had left, but because something had been resolved. The bar was quiet again, but no longer haunted. Just watched. Varco picked up the chip and locked it in the vault next to the pulsing bottle. He didn't bother asking how Dustwalker had known the bottle was still there. He probably always knew. He looked around the bar. A few patrons sipped nervously, others watched the door, waiting for some new threat to appear. But none came. For now, the drift was silent. Safe. And somewhere in the shadows of space, the Dustwalker was walking again. Not hunted. Not hiding. Just moving forward, one step at a time. And the galaxy would feel each one like an echo from a past it had tried too hard to forget.